My dad secretly changed the will, then died the next day before anyone knew what he did. I never expected to be posting about this anywhere, let alone sharing it in such a public space. But I need to get this off my chest. My father died last week, less than 24 hours after secretly changing his entire will, and now my family is tangled in a mess of shock, anger, and heartbreak. The story is so wild that even I have trouble believing it's my real life. Maybe writing it all down will help me figure out what to do next, or at least keep me from losing my mind. My name's Ashley. I'm 29, the middle child of 3. My father, John, was a larger-than-life presence, a successful businessman who built his own small empire, flipping real estate in suburban Illinois. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and somehow took up all the oxygen, a stern perfectionist with a stubborn streak that ran a mile wide. Growing up, my siblings and I both feared and admired him. Our mother, Catherine, was the quiet anchor who kept the family stable. She never argued in front of us, but behind closed doors, I'm sure there were fireworks between them because Dad was always used to getting his own way. I guess I should start with what happened at the reading of the will, because that's where everything blew up. Picture this. It's only been 5 days since Dad passed, and the whole family is still raw with grief. The funeral was set for later that week, and we were meeting at our family home, this big, rambling house Dad bought decades ago, to discuss some basic estate planning. We expected to hear that everything would be divided according to his old will, which had been in place for years. In that version, everything was laid out in a fairly predictable manner. The house and a decent portion of money would go to Mom, while my older brother Michael, my younger sister Sarah, and I would share the rest. Business assets, property, and so on. We were all in the living room when Mr. Blanchard, my father's lawyer of many years, cleared his throat and explained that there had been a recent change. I remember that exact phrase because it hung in the air like a poison cloud. A recent change. My mom sat up, eyes widening. Michael, who's 32 and never had a problem challenging Dad, folded his arms across his chest, already suspicious. Sarah, the baby of the family at 25, looked around with a nervous frown. And me, I just felt this crushing sense of unease. Like I knew something big was about to happen and there was no way to stop it. Mr. Blanchard pulled out a crisp sheaf of papers and started reading. Our father had revised his will the day before he died. Everything changed. The family home was to be sold, not kept, with the proceeds going into a trust. The real estate business he'd built, Bennett and Company, was to be placed under the sole management of Michael. That in itself was shocking, because Dad had always complained that Michael was too impulsive. But it got weirder. Dad assigned me half the shares in that company, effectively making me co-owner. Me, the middle child who never showed much interest in real estate. Meanwhile, Sarah was left a relatively small sum of money compared to what we assumed she'd get. Mom was entitled to some joint accounts, but not the comfortable inheritance we all expected. At first, the room was deathly silent. Then Michael spoke up, voice shaking with anger. Why would he do that? He never said a word about changing the will. Why the hell would he leave you half the business if I'm the one who's been working at it for years? His glare pinned me to the couch. I opened my mouth to protest, but the truth is I was as baffled as he was. Dad never involved me in the management side of things. He was always calling Michael the natural heir to the business, if anything. Mom looked absolutely stricken. She'd cared for Dad through his final months of illness, some heart complications that escalated too quickly, and always assumed she'd be secure living in the house for the rest of her life. Sarah, meanwhile, gave a little gasp. He must have been coerced, she said in a small voice. He wouldn't do that to Mom. He wanted her to be safe. But Mr. Blanchard explained that Dad had been entirely lucid when he made these changes. No signs of cognitive impairment, no undue influence. He'd personally witnessed Dad insisting on these exact terms. It was like a bomb had detonated in our living room. Mom buried her face in her hands and started quietly sobbing. Michael demanded proof, wanting to see every line of Dad's signature. Sarah just stared at me, lips trembling, as though I'd orchestrated the entire thing behind her back. I had no answers. I could barely process the words. Dad died so suddenly. None of us thought to question what he might have been doing with his will. To make sense of how we got here, I need to rewind to the day before Dad died. It's still so vivid in my mind. He was at home, in his study, though we'd hired a private nurse to keep an eye on him because his heart condition had worsened. I remember going in to say hello, carrying a tray with a mug of tea. He was on the phone with someone, his voice low but urgent, and he waved me out of the room. That alone was odd, because Dad was never shy about letting me hear his phone calls. He always said, if you've got nothing to hide, you don't whisper behind closed doors. But he definitely had something he wanted to keep private that afternoon. A few minutes later, I overheard Dad talking to a visitor. A man in a suit who wasn't Mr. Blanchard, but someone else from his firm. I couldn't catch the words, but I saw Dad's face through a small gap in the door. He looked intense, determined. Then, for a split second, his gaze flicked upward, caught mine, and he frowned. I felt like I'd been caught eavesdropping, so I hurried away. He never mentioned it afterward. That night, I went to bed thinking Dad would have time to explain whatever that was about in the morning. But I never got that chance. He passed at dawn peacefully, they said. I remember standing in the hall when the nurse told us, my heart caving in on itself, feeling like the floor opened up beneath me. So now you understand why I was sitting there in stunned silence when Mr. Blanchard revealed the new will. My father, strong, brash, unstoppable, made a massive decision behind everyone's back, then left us to deal with the fallout. Immediately after the reading, Michael started yelling that he was going to challenge the will in court. Sarah asked if there was a possibility Dad's signature was forged. Mom sat silently for a while, face pale, then abruptly left the room and went upstairs. She locked herself in her bedroom. I followed a few minutes later and found her crying on the bed, hugging one of Dad's old flannel shirts. She kept asking, "Why would he do this to me, Ashley?" And I had no idea what to say. That night, the four of us, Mom, Michael, Sarah, and I, sat around the kitchen table trying to piece together some semblance of a plan. We had a funeral to organize, extended relatives to notify, and now the messy task of questioning this baffling, last-minute revision. Michael pointed out that Dad had always been unpredictable, but not cruel. Sarah insisted something didn't add up. I was the one who half-heartedly defended Dad, saying, "We can't assume he was manipulated or incompetent just because we don't like his decisions." Machi. But deep down, I couldn't fathom why he'd change everything so drastically. The following morning, I began sorting through the piles of paperwork in his study, looking for any clue as to what triggered this sudden shift. It was a place that smelled like old leather, fresh coffee, and hints of pipe tobacco from his younger days. Everywhere I looked, there were traces of him. Old family photos, property deeds, and a neglected dusty dictionary he used whenever he felt like double-checking a word. I pulled open a desk drawer and found a small notebook, brown cover, spiral binding. The first few pages were mostly scribbled notes about real estate deals, but then I turned a page and saw my name scrawled at the top in thick pen strokes, Ashley. Capable, but needs a push? My heart hammered as I read Dad's private musings. He'd been listing what he considered my strengths. I had a level head under pressure. I took time to weigh pros and cons. I'd always managed my own finances responsibly. On the opposite page, he'd jotted down concerns about Michael's recklessness, how Michael had risked the family business once with a questionable land deal. I saw Sarah's name too, with a note that she had no interest in real estate, and that forcing her to participate might make her miserable. Then there was a line about Mom, about how he needed to ensure Catherine is taken care of no matter what, but that she doesn't want to stay in the house alone. Too many memories. My jaw practically fell open. She'd never once mentioned wanting to leave the house, yet Dad had scrawled down a bullet point. She told me she's scared it'll feel empty without me. Eeyore! I sat on the old leather chair, turning pages while tears rolled down my cheeks. This was Dad's version of brainstorming, I realized. He was planning out the next chapter for us even as his health failed. It wasn't exactly sweet. He was basically dictating our futures, but it was grounded in some logic. He must have believed selling the house would free Mom from painful memories, while giving her enough money for a modest, comfortable home somewhere else. Maybe he saw me as a stable partner for Michael, preventing him from going off the rails with the company. And Sarah would get a chunk of money to do what she wanted without being tied to real estate. Reading his notes made me feel like I was glimpsing some paternal plan he never explained to us. But I also felt a surge of anger. If he wanted these outcomes, why not talk to us openly? Why do it in secret last minute and leave behind a ticking time bomb? I confronted Michael with the notebook that evening. He was furious. Less about the content and more about the fact Dad had apparently lost faith in his ability to run the business alone. "This is ridiculous," Michael spat, tossing the notebook onto the table. "All because of that one bad investment I made? He thinks I'm some loose cannon who needs Ashley's supervision?" I tried to remain calm, but inside I was churning with mixed feelings. On one hand, I'd never wanted to overshadow my older brother. On the other, Dad's notes seemed right in line with how we'd grown up. Michael was the big dreamer, always chasing something bigger and riskier. I was the methodical one, double-checking every angle. Maybe Dad's logic wasn't far off, but Michael felt deeply betrayed. Sarah wandered in, hugging a sweatshirt to her chest, looking anxious. If Dad knew I hate the real estate world, why wouldn't he leave me more money so I could travel, get my own place, or start a small business? She was half in tears again. "I don't want to fight with you guys," I just hate that none of this feels fair, especially to Mom. Ew. Mom was the hardest one to read. She'd gone quiet, drifting from room to room as if she couldn't settle. One minute, she was making phone calls about funeral arrangements. The next, she was gazing out the window clutching a photo of Dad in his army uniform. Late that night, I found her awake in the kitchen, staring into a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She looked at me with hollow eyes and said, "I told your father once that I'd never want to live in this house if he wasn't here." I guess he remembered. I asked if she was angry with him, and she gave a half smile that quickly turned to tears. Angry, yes. Heartbroken, yes. But mostly, I wish I'd known, so I could tell him it's okay to be honest. I'd rather have had a conversation than this messy aftermath. Ugh. The funeral came and went in a haze of condolences and flowers, eulogies that painted Dad as the unstoppable patriarch. Michael and I managed to stand side by side without glaring at each other, but tension radiated off him. Sarah cried through most of the service, and Mom looked poised but fragile, as if one good shove would break her into pieces. Afterward, we all drifted back to the house, forced to share space while visitors dropped off casseroles and offered empty words of comfort. In between the polite greetings, I could hear hushed talk about the rumors. Some people had already heard Dad changed his will. Neighbors and relatives whispered that our family was in for a rocky time. Oats! It escalated the day Michael announced he was contacting a separate attorney to look into contesting the will. Dad wasn't in his right mind, he insisted. He was on all kinds of heart meds, and maybe they messed with his judgment. Mom tried to persuade him that Dad knew exactly what he was doing, but Michael wouldn't budge. Sarah, stuck in the middle, was petrified of a legal battle. She wanted to avoid courts at all costs. As for me, I felt like I'd been drafted into a war I never asked to fight. I didn't want to co-own the business. I didn't want to see my brother humiliated or my sister miserable. I just wanted Dad back, healthy and alive, so he could explain himself. I spent my free hours combing through more of Dad's documents, hoping to find something concrete that could give us clarity. That's when I found a small external hard drive labeled, in Dad's scribbly handwriting, "Personal, important." My heart thudded. I popped it into his old desktop computer. Inside were financial statements, scanned letters, and 2 video files. One was dated nearly a month ago, the other just 2 days before he died. My hands trembled as I clicked on the first. Dad's face appeared on the screen. He was sitting in the study wearing a loose-fitting sweater. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. He glanced at the camera and said, "All right, so I'm making this for my own records. Catherine's probably going to kill me if she finds out I'm messing around with a camera instead of resting." He gave a wry grin. "I need to set some things straight about the future of this family." Then he started talking about Michael's strengths and weaknesses, about Sarah's gentle heart, about how I was the level-headed middle child. He explained his rationale for wanting to sell the house so that Mom wouldn't feel trapped in it alone. He said he was proud of us, something he rarely ever said to our faces, and that he wished he'd done more to guide us. It was a rambling, unpolished testament to how deeply he did think about our futures, even if he never showed it. I was sobbing by the time it ended, but I still had one more video to watch, the one dated 2 days before his death. The second video was shorter. He looked paler, clearly weaker, but his voice was determined. "This is an update. I'm going through with the change to my will," he said, clearing his throat. "I need Michael and Ashley to co-own Bennett and Company. I know that'll rile Michael up, but if they work together, they'll keep each other in check, and the business will thrive. Sarah shouldn't be chained to something she hates. Catherine will be okay if she just lets go of this house." He paused, tears shining in his eyes. "I love them so much. I don't want them fighting. If they're watching this after I'm gone, please understand I'm doing what I think is best. And if I'm wrong, well, I'm sorry." Oh, it was more emotion than I'd ever seen Dad show in person. He looked into the camera one last time. "Ashley, I know you don't think you're cut out for real estate, but you're strong. You've always been stronger than you realize." Then he turned off the recording. I was shaking all over, tears dripping onto the keyboard. As much as I hated the chaos he'd caused, I couldn't deny that he did it out of concern for each of us. He might have been misguided in assuming we'd just go along with it, but I felt closer to him than I had in years. After gathering my courage, I called everyone into the study, Mom, Michael, Sarah, and told them I had something they needed to see. They were suspicious, especially Michael, but they came. I set the files to play on the computer monitor so we could all watch together. Silence filled the room as Dad's image flickered on screen. Mom began to weep softly, pressing a tissue to her mouth. Sarah's eyes were red, tears rolling freely. Michael watched, arms folded tight, but even he couldn't hide the trembling in his jaw. When the second video ended, none of us spoke for a long moment. It felt like Dad was there with us, explaining himself the best way he could. Finally, Michael let out a shuddering breath. So, he really did think it through, he said, voice raw. He was worried about me messing up again. Great. That's so, Dad. He tried to sound sarcastic, but there was a hitch in his tone that betrayed how hurt he was. Mom wrapped an arm around him and he didn't pull away. Sarah sniffled. He said he loved us. He never said that to our faces, not in so many words. She sank onto the old leather chair, hugging herself. I wish he'd told us sooner. Maybe we'd have understood. Well, I could see the conflict in Michael's eyes. On one hand, Dad's explanation was heartfelt and rational. But on the other hand, it was basically a sign Dad had lost trust in him to run things alone. He stared at the floor for a while, then said, I don't know if I can just let this go. But maybe I won't challenge the will in court. Yet. There was a faint concession in his voice. Mom exhaled a shaky sigh of relief. Sarah got up and hugged him. He didn't hug back at first, but eventually he patted her shoulder. Baby steps, I thought. Over the next few days, we found ourselves in an uneasy truce. We had funeral details to iron out-of-town relatives to coordinate. Everyone was tiptoeing around each other, trying to pretend we were united so as not to cause a scene with guests. But we still had underlying issues to address. Chief among them was the question of how to handle the company, the sale of the house, and what portion of money Sarah and Mom would actually see. Then came a big twist. We learned Dad hadn't just changed his will regarding the real estate business. He'd also purchased a small plot of farmland in Wisconsin that no one knew about. It was apparently another potential flip. That farmland was left specifically to me, with a note that said, For Ashley, maybe you'll find the peace out here I never could. Michael was blindsided, which only fueled his resentment. First, he gives you half of Bennett and Company. Logically, now you get farmland, too, he snapped. I had to stop him right there. I don't even know what to do with farmland, Michael. Stop acting like I asked for this. We argued in hushed tones because Mom was in the next room, and the last thing we wanted was to upset her more. But it was clear Michael still toyed with the idea of challenging the will. He threatened to drag everything through the courts, in his words, unless I promised to give him partial ownership of that farmland or buy him out at a fair rate. The stress level in the house rose to a fever pitch. Sarah started avoiding us both. Mom hovered like a ghost, trying to keep the peace and failing. That's when I did something uncharacteristic. I took the car, drove out to Wisconsin for a day, and visited the farmland. It was a humble piece of land, nothing spectacular, 30 acres or so, with a rundown barn perched on a slope. But standing there among the tall grass and the lazy buzz of insects, I felt an odd sense of closeness to Dad, like I could almost hear his voice saying, See, it's not so bad out here. I realized maybe Dad's last gift wasn't about flipping property. Maybe it was his attempt at giving me a retreat from the chaos. Driving back that evening, I had a plan forming in my head. If Michael truly wanted more than half the business, I'd relinquish part of my share, on paper, and keep the farmland. We'd find a middle ground so he didn't feel cheated. But I also realized Dad was right. Michael needed someone to keep his wilder impulses in check. I wasn't sure if that was my responsibility, but it felt like Dad had handed me a puzzle I had to solve. The day before the funeral, I pulled Michael aside. We walked down to the end of our street where we could talk without prying ears. I said, I'll give you a bigger stake in Bennett and Company, if that's what it takes to stop this legal fight. You can run it, make the calls, but I keep enough shares that I can veto anything too risky. Deal? He was quiet a long time. So you want me to be the face of the company while you babysit me? His tone was bitter, but I heard hurt more than anything. I tried to keep my voice steady. I don't want to babysit. I just don't want to see you gamble everything Dad built. Maybe if we do this together, it'll work. Us. He looked away, blinking hard. Dad had no faith in me, he muttered. He always thought I was a screw-up. This was his way of controlling me from beyond the grave. I reminded him of the notes Dad wrote, about how Dad acknowledged his talent. He just worried about those big leaps of faith Michael loved to take. Finally, Michael let out a shaky breath and said, Fine, we'll figure out some arrangement. Better that than a lawsuit that rips us apart. By the morning of the funeral, we'd reached a tentative agreement. We'd honor Dad's will, sell the house, give Mom a large portion of the proceeds so she could live wherever she pleased. Michael would get a controlling interest in Bennett and Company. Из зрения с меня хватает достаточно, чтобы удерживать его рискованное поведение в пределах. Sarah would receive her inheritance plus a little extra from the house sale, so she could pursue her dream of starting a small interior design studio. And the farmland, that would be mine to keep or sell. I decided for now to keep it. Something in me wanted to hold on to that piece of Dad, even if it was just a patch of rolling green in rural Wisconsin. The funeral itself was emotional beyond words. Sitting in the church, listening to the minister talk about Dad's life story, I saw my mother's shoulders shake with silent sobs. Michael clenched his jaw the entire time, tears brimming in his eyes but never spilling over. Sarah's face was blotchy, tears streaming down her cheeks. And me, I felt a confusing swirl of grief and strange gratitude that at least we'd come to some fragile peace before we laid Dad to rest. Afterward, a handful of relatives came up to me, offering condolences. Some asked if it was true Dad had changed his will so suddenly. I nodded but didn't elaborate. I noticed my Aunt Linda giving me a sympathetic look, maybe because she'd heard all about the drama from the rumor mill. I ducked out early, needing some air. That's when I found Mom outside, sitting on a little stone bench in the cemetery garden. She was holding a white rose someone had given her, fingers trembling around the stem. She didn't look up when I approached, but after a moment she said, "He told me once this house was too big, too empty, that I should travel. I never thought he was actually serious, you know? I thought it was just talk. But here we are." I rested a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe you can travel now," I said gently. "Dad provided for you in his own way, even if it wasn't what we expected." She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He did love us, didn't he? He had such a strange way of showing it." I didn't have the perfect response, so I just hugged her. We stayed there, arms wrapped around each other, quietly grieving the man who had shaped our lives, for better or for worse. That was about a week ago. In the days since, we've taken the first steps toward implementing Dad's final wishes. The house is being appraised. Michael and I have started talking about restructuring the business. Sarah's looking at potential office spaces for her design studio, with a plan to hire 1 or 2 employees. Mom's actually browsing travel brochures. She might go to Italy, the place she always dreamed of visiting. It's not perfect, but it's better than the all-out war we nearly had. Sometimes I still get angry. Angry that Dad dropped this bomb on us in secret, that he never gave us a chance to discuss it openly. Other times, I'm strangely thankful he forced us to break old patterns and talk about our fears and resentments. After all, Michael and I hadn't really communicated in years, and now we're forging a cautious partnership. Sarah's finally free from feeling obligated to do something she hates. Mom has permission, in a sense, to start a new chapter of her life outside that old house. Me? I'm still reeling, but I have a sense of direction I never had before. Last night, I drove up to the farmland for a weekend away. Just me and a sleeping bag in the barn. The place is run down, so I slept on a wooden cot in a half-cleaned corner. Rain pattered on the tin roof all night. I woke up at dawn and looked out over the fields, remembering how Dad used to say real estate was only as good as the passion behind it. I never had a passion for flipping houses, but maybe I can find a passion for preserving this little patch of land he left me. I'm not sure yet, but it feels like the start of something. I still miss him like crazy. Part of me keeps expecting him to stride through the front door, barking orders, telling me to watch out for snakes in the grass. But he's gone, and this bizarre, revised will is his final legacy to us. We can fight it, or we can try to see the method in his madness. For now, we're choosing to see the method. I wish I could say everything is sunshine and roses. Michael and I still have spats. He's got big ideas about expanding Bennett and Company into new markets, and I'm constantly urging caution. Sarah sometimes complains that the money Dad left her isn't as much as she hoped. Mom is overwhelmed by the prospect of selling the house she's lived in for 30 years. But at least we're talking to each other instead of shouting past each other. Sometimes that's all you can ask for in a family that's been rattled to its core. I don't know what Dad was thinking in those last moments right before he changed the will. Maybe he felt guilty for not preparing us better. Maybe he realized time was running out and had a last-minute epiphany. Or maybe he was just being his usual stubborn self, making decisions because he thought he knew best. Whatever the reason, he left behind a puzzle. We're still working on solving it, piece by piece, argument by argument, compromise by compromise. And if I can share one thing with anybody reading, tell the people you love how you feel while you still can. Don't let them find out by reading some scribbled notes or watching a grainy video after you're gone. It's a painful way to discover how deeply someone cares. But if there's one comfort I take from all this, it's that Dad did love us, fiercely, clumsily, in his own controlling way. Under all the property deeds and legal documents, there was genuine concern for each of us, and that's something I can hold on to through the chaos. I'm not naive. I know the road ahead is going to be bumpy. We still have to finalize paperwork, talk to accountants, deal with relatives who might feel slighted. But at least we have a direction now. I keep the notebook on my desk, along with a printed still from Dad's video. Every so often, I flip through the pages he wrote about me, about our family. It reminds me that even if we didn't get to have a heart-to-heart conversation before he died, He was thinking about us until the very end. So that's my story. My dad secretly changed his will and died the next day before anyone knew what he did, throwing my family into a tailspin of anger, confusion, and slow acceptance. We're navigating the fallout one day at a time. It's not a fairy tale ending, but it's real, and maybe that's enough. If nothing else, it's taught me that sometimes the people who love you the most show it in the most complicated ways, and you don't realize how much they cared until you're forced to see it through a new lens. I'm heading back to the farmland soon to clear out the barn some more. I can almost hear Dad's voice telling me to seal the roof properly before the winter comes. And maybe that's what love looks like. A father's echo reminding you to fix a roof you never knew you'd inherit, believing you can handle it. It's not the love story I imagined, but it's the one I've got. And despite everything, I'm going to make the best of it. For him, for my family, and for myself.